Greetings and welcome to our daily walk through the scriptures for February the 28th. Our readings today we're wrapping up Leviticus 22 and we read Leviticus chapter 23. Then we have finishing out Mark chapter 9 and starting Mark chapter 10 with verses 1 through 12. Then we have Psalm 44 verses 1 through 8 and Proverbs chapter 10 verse 19. Now, as we look at this, you're still continuing to dive into Leviticus, and you're getting into some of the festivals and some of those things, and it gets a little bit confusing. Well, here's what I want you to know about festivals. Most of those festivals have something to do with the story of the Exodus, okay? And so the festivals are designed to remind the people of Israel about what it is that God has done. And this is important for us as well, because I think sometimes we get so caught up in the struggles and the trials of today that we forget about what God has been faithful with us in yesterday. Because if God has been faithful to us yesterday, He will also continue to be faithful to us tomorrow. Does that make sense? See, God doesn't change, and we've seen this already. God is a God who does not change, who is slow to anger, and He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if we can look back at the promises that God fulfilled yesterday, we can also know that God will continue to fulfill those promises tomorrow. So in these, when He talks about the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread, that has to do with when the Hebrews quickly had to leave their homes and they didn't have time to make dough rise and those kind of things. And talking about the Passover, which we know was the horrific killing of all the firstborns in Egypt. That was when the angel of death went over and passed over every single door that had the red mark on it. The blood, not just red mark, it was just blood. And then the same thing with the Festival of the Trumpets and Atonement and Tabernacles. Each one of these has a specific reminder on the goodness, the greatness, and the provisions of God. And so we need to hold on to those and be reminded of them, especially when we have difficult days, because we're going to have them. We're going to have difficult days. Looking at the life of Jesus in Mark chapter 9, through every miracle that we see Jesus having, there's also a season where there's difficulty, where there's great hardship, great things that will come. And some of them are from external, some of them are internal, but we're going to have these difficulties and these hardships no matter what. And this is something that we need to be able to remember, is that God continues to remain faithful to us no matter what happens. So when you look in Mark chapter 9 and Mark chapter 10 and you see some of the accountings of what Jesus says, we can be reminded. I mean, Jesus in 9:30 talks about Him being delivered into the hands of men and killing Him. I mean, these are hardships, but Jesus wanted them to know also what was to be coming would still be a beautiful thing. Talks about Jesus driving demons out in His name and becoming like a little child and becoming innocent. All of these things are based upon the promises that God has given us. You're like, well, how is this, Jeremy? Well, it's very simple. Remember, Jesus has been prophesied for thousands of years. He was promised that He was coming for thousands of years. And now that Jesus is here, He's building upon those promises, but He's also creating and adding new promises. Because remember, the promises that were given to Abraham was that he was going to save the world, that he was going to be the Savior of the world. Well, what exactly was He going to save from? Well, Jesus is now starting to show us and reveal to us that the salvation that He's bringing is not political, which we've talked about. It is eternal. And so Jesus is setting the framework for why He has the power that He has, why He has the authority, why He is doing the things that He's doing as the suffering servant. All of these things are promises that God has made and that God is in the process of fulfilling, and that God will then tomorrow bring. And we are the tomorrow for the New Testament, just so you know. But our tomorrow is still to come. So we can look at all these things and we can remember the goodness and the graciousness of God, even in the difficulties, even in the trials. You remember in the Exodus, if you go back to Exodus, you remember that the people of Israel suffered for generations before Moses came. The time between Joseph and Moses was not just a couple of years, it was generational. And so God will always deliver us out of these things at some point. What that looks like, well, that's still to be seen. but we can always remember that God has been faithful yesterday, and we can trust that God will be faithful for us again tomorrow. Okay, that's our thought for the day. We'll talk next time.